Hello, 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 everybody, and welcome to Stellaris, How to Conquer the Galaxy Without Really Trying. I'm your host, DJ, and with me I have some guests who definitely know what they're doing when it comes to conquering the galaxy. So first, from within Paradox, we have Byron. Hi there, Byron. We have Jojo. Hello, Jojo.
Hello.
And then from outside of Paradox, we have Stefan.
Howdy.
We have UMAR.
Hello.
And we have Regunes.
Hello.
Right, so first of all, a quick intro as to who these gentlemen are and what they do and why they're here. So, Byron, who are you? Why are you here and everything like that?
Okay, I'm Byron. I am one of the QA team on Stellaris. So my day job is investigating the new features that our designers, programmers, and everyone else implements and make sure that they're working as they should. When I'm not doing that, it's checking community bug reports and trying to reproduce those and figure out why they're happening and then verifying fixes for them.
And
That's
Jojo?
my job in a nutshell.
Perfect. And Jojo?
Hi. I'm also on the QA team in Stellaris. I'm the QA lead. I lead the team of embedded testers and other people. I manage the scheduling, prioritization of issues, and also I essentially have the I don't want to say final say, but the buck stops with me when it comes to quality on the game decisions.
Perfect. So then we have from YouTube, Stefan. Hi there, Stefan.
Greetings. I am a YouTuber. I have a channel, Stefan Annon, and I do guides on Stellaris. And some of the stuff I discover, QA really doesn't like, but they're friends for now.
And also from YouTube, we have Regunes. Hi there, Regunes.
Hello. So my trademark on YouTube is mostly doing silly stuff about Stellaris. So I'm pretty much touching up everything, which is convenient for finding bugs or other hidden, perks of the
Yeah.
game.
And then last, but by no means least, the wonderful Umar. Hi there, Umar.
Hello. I'm just a part of the Stelaris community. I love playing in big multiplayer games, especially with the other two YouTubers mentioned before me. And I also like discovering interesting bugs and features about Stelaris.
So, what we're going to do in this talk is Umar, Regunes, and Stefan have prepared a presentation for us, which we'll be going over to in a moment. We're going to be going through that, and they have a whole world of stuff they're going to take you guys in the audience through, tips, tricks, all sorts of stuff. And then our QA chaps here are here to sort of discuss and talk about what these guys are bringing up. So we think this should be quite interesting. And so without further ado, we'll swap on over to the presentation.
Howdy. So me, Umar, and Regunes will be telling you guys about how to play the game in the most effective, efficient, and actually quite simple way possible to beat up literally anything else in the galaxy. I'll be starting off by telling you guys about how to make a nice economy with a very simple empire, specifically a hive mind. Hive mind tends to be one of the more simpler empire types to play for a few reasons. This is the build that we'll be using, and the reasons for hive minds being good is because they really are quite simple and quite effective. You don't have to deal with consumer goods. You only have a few basic resources to worry about. You don't have to deal with factions, happiness, political power, none of that jazz. And you have insane growth and really good jobs, which are also very straightforward and very simplified. Now, on the higher ends of gameplay, you might want to manage happiness, political power, and everything like that, but Hive Mind, as it is in 3.0.3, is very solid. And so we'll be able to make do with just what we have. We'll be boosting our Hive Mind with some of the most top tier civics in the game, specifically Ascetic and Memorialist. Ascetic is a very straightforward plus 5% habitability and minus 15% amenities. And yeah, with Hive Minds, you really want to make sure you're good on amenities. The more amenities your pops are using, the more maintenance drones you have to use, and maintenance drones are the one inefficient job with hive minds. So by minimizing the amount of maintenance drone jobs, we maximize our output with other stuff. Otherwise, we have Memorialist. Memorialist will allow us to use all the extra building slots we have in the current version. It's really easy to just build up new city districts and just have more building slots. Well, we can use those building slots to use Memorialist. With Memorialist, we have buildings that grant us stability. Stability is very hard to get as a hive mind, and by spamming buildings that can produce up to 15 stability each, we can really make do with really high stability and really high output planets without having to deal with any of the stuff organics would have to. Additionally, we're using Tree of Life, another great origin. You could, of course, use anything else for your hive mind, but Tree of Life is really going to help you with growth across your empire. I figure it's about 20 to 25% extra growth overall due to the various bonuses it gives. As far as trades go, we have to optimize those as well. And this is just a simple case of you copy this, you put it into your actual game, and you just kind of dominate. Ingenious, Charismatic, and Natural Engineers are probably three of the best traits in the game. Ingenious, modifying Technicians, and Technicians are really good. We'll get to why that is a bit later. Charismatic, as I mentioned before, increases amenities output, which means you have to use less maintenance drones. And Natural Engineers allows you to have 50% extra engineering research. And engineering is simply the best tech tree in the game. In exchange, we take 2 perks, which are completely negligible. Unruly and Solitary. Unruly increases sprawl from pops, but it increases it by only 10% and gives you 2 trait points. It's an amazing value for very, very little downside. And Solitary gives you extra housing usage, but with the current system, housing doesn't matter because you'll always want to have way too much housing to make sure your pop growth is going faster. And I see QA smiling.
I mean, well, on the one hand, I'm just happy that I've been playing a meta build this entire time in all the dev MPs with my hive minds. And secondly, it's interesting to hear just seeing the differences between things as intended and things in reality, and making mental notes about things that we might want to look into. Just to keep you guys on the toes, make sure you've got more content to keep putting out, right?
No,
And-
not my wonderful build.
From my perspective, it's interesting seeing you guys come up with this and then going, well, I did have that mention in my notes for things we might want to review balance on. Maybe that needs to take priority over some other things that we were looking at.
Yeah.
Carry on.
Right now, if you go into any multi-game, you will see Unruly on 100% of the population because it is
Completely.
just a must-have.
Yep.
All right. Moving on, as we get into the actual game with this very powerful build, like the build itself for an empire can already set you up for victory, and this build will set us up for victory for sure. However, there's some early moves that we have to go through, and this is probably another thing that's also not quite intended. What you do at the beginning is you strip down your corvettes. You go into the ship designer, you remove all the modules off your corvette design, and then you upgrade the corvette, and you actually get a refund on alloys. You get 145 alloys, and that can really help you get an extra early science ship and a scientist to go explore the galaxy. And yeah, science ships are something we do want to go for. The more exploration we have, the more intel we have on our nearby space, more events, more science from events. It all adds up. So we have to go for at least 3 science ships in the beginning, but I can go up to 5 and still feel fine. Once we start expanding, obviously we have to first survey the systems or just explore the space to check out which systems have planets in them and then survey them. That is a potential tactic you can do. But either way, we are looking for 2 things here. We're looking for planets and we're looking for choke points. Planets are, of course, essential to growing our empire, and choke points are great as well. If you can minimize the routes that an enemy can take to attack your empire, you can build up those specific locations and then be very defensive and spend more of your economy on economy rather than spending it on fleet. Because having a standing army, having a standing fleet early game is just a drain on your economy. You can better use those resources on actually building up planets instead of building up ships. And so generally, I would recommend, like here, to immediately try to go for those choke points and to immediately try to go for those planets to make sure that those are secure with star bases. And on those, you generally want hangar bays if you have them. Otherwise, just some guns. And you don't even need to have a big fleet. Like, you can straight up have 0 fleet in the beginning of the game, and you'll generally be fine if you have good choke points. One other thing to note is you got to colonize as soon as possible. Colonization is very important, and the earlier you get this done, the earlier you get your pop growth, and the earlier you get your ball rolling. I would even recommend colonizing this one, red low habitability planet. Generally, the downsides of colonizing a low hab world aren't too big. You'll generally still make a profit from colonizing these planets, and even if you don't, even if it's 0 habitability world, you can still grow pops there and simply resettle them to your other planets. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that's how it's supposed to work, but certainly how it works in the current system. So, speaking about economy, I'm sure all of you have seen the screen already. It's the economy window on your planets, and there's some stuff to cover. First and foremost, we have districts. Districts produce raw resources, and you're going to want to have a good chunk of raw resources, but not too much. It is much better to build buildings and to use those raw resources in producing science or alloys to build up a fleet to take out other empires. Ultimately, there's 2 ways of making your empire powerful, and that is high technology to ultimately boost your empire in a self-sustaining loop, or fleet, in which case you just kind of expand and take more stuff. The more stuff you take, the more powerful your empire gets. Bigger is always better. Now here, we can use our Sanctuary of Repose building that is unlocked by the Memorialist perk. If we have too many building slots, we can easily slap this thing on a planet, and just from the tier 1 building, we get 5 stability. We don't even have to employ the Chronicle Drone jobs. It's just the building itself gives 5 stability, and it can be upgraded to give 15 stability. You do have to pay gas upkeep, but it's very, very worthwhile. When it comes to your population, you're going to want as much of it as possible. So here on the planet, we're just beginning the game, and we're getting, 8 pop growth per month from just growth, and then 2 pop growth per month from assembly. This is where hive minds really shine. They have pretty insane pop growth, and Tree of Life is only going to help you with that. The thing with population is that the bigger your planet is, the more population grows on it. There's a bit of an S-curve as far as pop growth goes, and so having more planet capacity and having more population helps you out. Generally, you're going to want to go for about 25 pops and about 80 planet capacity. Planet capacity, by the way, you get by just hovering over the little planet size icon. If you go for those numbers, you'll be maxing out your growth from population. So you can be easily doubling your growth by just having enough population and enough capacity on the planet. And you're always going to want to max out your growth at all points of the game, because more pops is more economy is more power. There's another thing to keep track of on planets, and these are thresholds. This little thing is in the top right of your planetary view, and this is just stuff to keep in mind. You just have to know what numbers are good here. You want above 50% stability, and the more stability, the better. It just makes you produce more resources. You want as little crime as possible, although if you have under 30 crime, it doesn't do anything at all. So if you stay below 30 crime, you will not get any negative events. And in fact, you can use a bit of crime with a normal empire for a crime lord deal, which gives you 10 stability, which is just free resources. Now it gives
Hang
a
on.
criminal job.
Hang on.
Yep.
I've
No,
heard.
yep.
So we've
So there's
changed
a
that.
bit of a downside.
In the release version, it's got no downside. In 3.03, as DJ discovered in our internal MP yesterday, it gives you criminal jobs on your planet when you take it. Criminal
They
jobs decrease
spill
trade.
instantly.
Yes.
It's horrible.
After every
I'd still
update,
think-
always
I'd
read
still say
everything.
it's worth, but
Read
Always
the
read it.
tool tips, read the patch notes. We change things.
yeah.
Is it one criminal or multiple?
2.
2. Oh.
Wait, 2 criminals. Okay,
That's like
well
minus
that changes
10
things.
trade.
All right, then it's an actual trade-off now. Wow. All right,
Yes.
so
No
it's
such
not,
thing as a free
not as
lunch.
free.
It is still, it's arguably still interesting if it's a big planet, I guess, not the smaller ones.
There are times when it's still going to be viable, but it's different now.
All right. Moving on. We want to have as much housing as possible. Before, you wanted to keep housing below 0, just to make sure there's enough housing on the planet. But in 3.0, having more housing helps your population grow, and so you're going to end up with a lot of housing. However, common misconception: this thing right here, open housing, it does not affect population growth. What affects population growth is planetary capacity. Can I go back? Yeah. So you get that by hovering over the icon, and planetary capacity is unaffected by how much housing is actually used up on the planet. That is why solitary is so good. It doesn't matter how much housing you have used up. As long as you have extra pop capacity, you're good to go.
Byron, make a note of that.
I've
I'm
literally
taking a note of
written
that.
name and note that I was bugging on game design.
Yep. Also, next thing, amenities. Amenities actually makes complete sense. With amenities, you want them to be above 0 to avoid the really negative modifiers. Because you really, once you go below 0 amenities, you get serious penalties. Going above 0 amenities doesn't give you as much of a benefit. So just spamming amenities isn't going to help you. And with hive minds especially, the only way to really get amenities is via maintenance drones, and they produce 5 amenities each. And so you're really not going to get a benefit from having too much amenities. You just always want to keep this above 0 at all times. Although this can help you if you're just conquering something and you want to increase happiness on a planet by a bit, albeit inefficiently. Yeah, you can spam amenities, but generally, just keep it above 0. You want to keep the number of jobs available as well. Unless you have a planet which is just meant for growth and all the pops that grow there are supposed to migrate to other planets, you want to make sure there's extra jobs. And same for unemployment. You don't want unemployed pops unless you're trying to migrate them, because an unemployed pop is the worst thing for your economy that you can have. Unemployment kills. So, later on we're going to mention clerks. Clerks are not available as a hive mind, but even clerks are better than unemployment. Anything is better than an unemployed pop. And if you're in a crisis where you have way too much unemployment across your whole empire, you have to fix the crisis. It can take down an empire. But yeah, next up we have the screenshot of planet capacity. On this size 18 planet, we have 65 planet capacity because we have some housing districts which provide housing, and then we also have open districts. So if we take a look here, we have open districts, and each open district will give us extra planetary capacity. I can give you the entire numbers, but basically normal planets are the baseline. Gaia worlds, Hive worlds are better, and then Tomb worlds are actually worse at planet capacity than normal planets. Previously, I mentioned starbases. You actually have 2 options for starbases now, especially for gestalts. You could either go defensive early game and just have hangar bays. Hangar bays are by far the best module to have. You do have to research it though. Or you can have economy stations. You can have solar panels and hydroponics bays. And I'll be honest here, these are pretty OP in the current version. And it is a bit of a shame that organics aren't getting these, because organics don't get solar panels. Solar panels produce a base of like 6 energy per panel, but organics get trading, trade collection stuff that can only be made to make 2 trade values. So QA, can you please buff that?
We can make
QA
suggestions.
doesn't buff anything.
We just tell people.
No. You complain to the devs that they buff it. Yeah. But yeah, for gestalts currently, having just economy stations is really good. Like I would straight up go for new stations just to put economy modules on them. Just solar panels, hydroponics, and they're worth it.
I've crunched the numbers. You can, if you just build starbases with only solar panels, go above your soft starbase limit a significant amount until it starts being a net cost and a net
Oh my
drain.
god. That is big brain. I haven't actually thought of that.
Especially once you get the text that boosts solar panel output.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'll start using that until it's patched out. Next thing, we got the market. The market has been a source of QA headaches since its introduction in 2.2. But ultimately, it's a great tool for you to use. With the market, you can buy or sell your resources at will. Obviously, the more you sell, the prices will eventually go down, and you won't be making as much of a profit. But it's a great tool for balancing out your economy. So if you have way too many resources in storage, for example, way too much food, you can sell the food and then use those resources for something else, like alloys. Just build up ships. One other thing to note is in the current balance of things, it is actually more efficient to buy minerals than it is to produce minerals from miners. Unless you're getting modifications from certain buildings, technicians produce a base of 6 energy, and miners produce a base of 4 minerals. So it's more efficient to just buy the minerals. You can do it quite a bit. There's a limit of how much you can buy before it becomes way too expensive. That limit is about 50 per month. But up to that point, I would highly recommend buying minerals. And ideally, like you can genuinely just have technicians working away in your empire and just rely on those to buy up other resources. This is especially viable with machines. Machines produce a base of 8 energy per tech drone, which is insane. So yeah, that's the market. And one of the things you can use the market for is you sell off excess resources and you go to curators and artisans to go and buy the goodies from them. With curators, you can get a solid 10% research speed bonus. It's going to cost you anywhere from 1,000 to 5,000 energy. But if you have way too much energy, getting your research boosted is very nice. Research is one of the things you really want to sink resources into. And so going for curators and maybe even hiring a scientist off of them is really nice. This is part of the Leviathans and Distant Stars, I believe, DLC. Same with artisans. With artisans, you can get a plus 10% to unity across your empire, which also gives you events to get more influence. So if you really need influence, going for artisans is really nice. You can also buy art monuments from them, which gives you extra amenities. And as I mentioned before, with Gestalts and hive minds in particular, you really do want as much amenities as you can get, because the less maintenance drones pops you have working, the more you have working in other jobs. So just buying this for 6,000 energy and spamming it across all your worlds, very worthwhile. As an organic, you can also order a festival of the worlds from them for extra pop growth and happiness. They can go back on the deal and just kind of stop talking to you if you do that, but that's the risk you gotta take.
And if you have xenocompatibility turned on, you might get an event which spawns half species of the artisans and half species of yours.
Yeah.
Which can be useful if the artisans have species traits you lack.
Or habitability you lack. So that was Stefan's little portion of the presentation. Before we go on to the next section, I figured we'd all have a little natter about that. First thing, I hadn't even twigged that the first 50 minerals a month are cheaper to buy like that. That's very, very clever.
Mm-hmm.
I like that a lot. But yeah, sort of over to you two at this point, Byron and Jojo.
I mean, there's going to be a running theme here, I think, with all of these, where there's two types of unintended design. There's those that kind of like make interesting gameplay, and then there's the stuff that kind of just gives you stuff for free. each of those can be graded on a scale of like it probably should be investigated or not. For example, like stripping your ships at the beginning of a game is a sort of level of optimization that I don't think needs any input from the from the developers at all, because that is a very specific scenario. We don't have to worry about that at all. That's fine. When it's something like Byron unfortunately just unveiled to the world, that you can just build Starbases forever and use a new now buffed thing with the solar panels. That has to be very specifically looked at. Does this prevent people from having to make a decision, right? If it's something you have to do all the time, like Unruly, where if you want to be competitive, you have to do it, then it's something we on the development side should probably take a look at, because as there should always be things that are more powerful than others. That's part of the appeal of Stellaris, is that there's ways to play the game that are unoptimal but still pretty fun. But that just means that when there are weaker elements of the game, we need to raise the reward so that they become viable as well. But it's very interesting to think about, because when something is being designed, and I'm not a designer for any case, so you can ask them how specifically, but my takeaway has always been that it's we're always looking to cater to a very specific player fantasy. When someone looks at something, they should see it's cool. And while we put in a lot of effort to make sure we understand the mechanical complexities, the Paradox Grand Strategy games in general, they're just such an interwoven network of systems. Once you get it into the hands of a person like Stefan, or even Byron on as well, the as designed implementation can get messy real quick, and it's both informative and ingenious, but also can be a little annoying. I'm glad we talked about the market, because you talked about the resources, and I want to talk about early. I know we want to talk about bugs later on, but the greatest bug of all time, which is the AI gets a lot of stick, but it is quite clever, and it understands time, and it looked at the market. When it was made aware of the market as a thing, it tried to buy the most valuable thing of all, because it was the one thing it couldn't get from anywhere else on its in the Empire. It tried to buy time for the longest time, because that is as far as the AI is concerned, that's a resource. So it wouldn't buy anything else.
Index 0 in the game's code. It is the most important resource.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If any of us could buy time, we probably would. So I can understand the AI wanting to do that. Yeah.
But I mean, look, Byron, I'm going to hand this over to you. Like, going over the build that Stefan just showed us. Is there anything there that you screamed at that needs to be fixed, that needs to be changed, or because
already aware that things like Solitary with our new pop growth system don't have an impact that's worth the trade-off. I'm already aware of that, and I'd already flagged that. There's nothing there that screams that, this needs balancing for 3.0.3 to come out on Monday, because we're recording this on a Friday. But there's definitely things that I've picked up on that, yes, we should reconsider. For example, Memorialists. Maybe we should only have that stability bonus kicking if pops are working the jobs they provide, the building provides. Because right now you can build those temples and, cut the jobs, and you still get the stability bonus. That doesn't seem right to me.
Yeah, but at the same time, we have to make sure that we're not, ruining how most people play this game single player. I don't think that's any secret. Oh, and definitely not to the level of optimization here. And by cutting Stefan's Achilles heel here, we don't want to ruin how other people enjoy the game as well. So it's a lot.
Why all of these things we raise them to the designers, and then there's a bit of back and forth of, is this worth it? And yeah, there's always trade-offs.
Yeah, but overall, I think that was like the perfect introduction to like the very basics of building an empire and the things you need to start considering with a hive mind, which you don't have to worry about happiness and everything else. So, 10 out of 10.
Are there things that I would do in the early game when doing initial exploration is I don't bother exploring systems that are within choke points that I know of, because time spent exploring those is time not spent exploring systems that other empires might end up controlling. So I just beeline choke points, and anything that's within my borders or will be within my borders once I've got choke points is backfilled later.
And if you don't have a response to that, Stefan, I have a quick question.
All right.
How out of all this, it seems the glaring thing to me seems to be like there would be a bit of a bottleneck in expansion in influence. How do you deal with that?
I always beeline towards choke points. And so I take space, I secure a chunk of space, I close my borders, and then I fill in all the other systems that I can get a hold of later. So that expansion, it's not just a case of, going out in a blob, it's going out in lines and then blobbing out later. Because that way the expansion phase can take longer and I can use, influence I get over time. Plus, the first contact thing, if you set that on proactive, you get so much influence. It's insane.
It is pretty nice
yeah.
being nice to your neighbors. At least when you're
being
meeting
nice
them.
to expand real quick.
Yeah, you can be mean to your neighbors and try and get a free step, taking, but you can be nice and get a ton of influence.
Yeah.
It has advantages to be aggressive against your neighbors, because if you kill the scientist by adopting him, you can just stop their exploration altogether, and that means that you can probably secure that system that you really need.
I imagine that makes in a MP environment the initial first contacts rather tense if there's the possibility that someone might.
Space is dangerous in multiplayer games.
Yep.
Society tech is also very interesting to take.
Otherwise, something I've used the market for on our internal MP that we started up, going with the Ringworld origin. Your arcane generator will give you enough resources to sustain one of each district type, but not anymore. But you can buy those resources off the internal markets to sustain a second science district. Yes, it's expensive, but it seems to be working well. And I would say that
the tech. Yeah, and it gets you to the tech for gases quicker, and then it becomes self-sustaining.
Yeah, you can also do a big brain move, and you know how you have to clear some blockers to be able to get the initial chunk of strategic resources?
Mm-hmm.
Because you start with an industrial district, you have access to moats. So what you do is you buy moats right away off the market, you pop that volatile clearance edict, and then it's cheaper and faster to clear blockers to unlock new segments.
Nice.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I like that.
There's a lot of stuff you can do to optimize the game, and that's what I love about Stellaris. How there's just so many little things you can do, and how even now, 2,500 hours in, I'm still optimizing my gameplay because there's always room for improvement.
So at this point, I'm going to hurry us on to our second presentation. So the techno slavers.
That would be my part. I'm going to present to you the techno slavers. Now, what are those? The techno slavers basically mean that you have two very specific civics, the technocracy and the slaver guild. These in combination will allow you to have enslaved researchers that will be not only more efficient, but also cheaper to sustain the normal researchers. Okay, I've created this empire to showcase that specific mechanic. We're using the necrophage origin that I'm going to present a little bit later on, and those two civics that I talked about earlier. Our ethics are phonetic materialist and authoritarian, because you need authoritarian for the slaver guilds, and you need to be a phonetic materialist to choose the technocracy civic, which is, in my opinion, the most overpowered civic in the entire game. I have also put together a species with certain traits. Of course, we have the necrophage trait because of our origin. We have the unruly trait because, every species needs the unruly trait. We already have established that. And then I put in rapid breeders, intelligent, and natural engineers. just because those are decent traits to have for your researchers / rulers. But in the end, it doesn't really matter what your traits are or the traits of your secondary species that you start off with as necrophage, simply because we are going to rush the synth ascension as fast as possible. So, our civics are slaver guilds and technocracy. The slaver guilds will basically enslave 40% of our population. We can set the slave status for different species. For example, our starting secondary species, we can completely enslave those, but the civic is going to enslave 40% of even our core species. It also gives a nice 10% buff to the slave pop resource output. The technocracy, on the one side, gives you 3 researchers in form of science directors from your capital buildings, but the most important part is it also gives you 1 unity from researchers. What this allows you to do is to completely ignore any other sources of unity, especially the unity buildings, the culture worker jobs. You can completely ignore those and get all your unity from your researchers. And researchers will have a lot of. Our origin necrophage basically spawns 2 different planets, your starting planets, but instead of being normal starting planets, they will have primitive civilizations on them, which means 3 pops at game start. One other thing to note is that only your main species can produce leaders and ruler jobs. So either you will have to resettle your rulers, or you will have to get new ones with a special building. They will grow on their own if you let them, but they have a modifier that gives them minus 75% growth speed. So I would really just grow your secondary species, grow the species that you have conquered, and don't worry about the growth of your main species. The authority is basically a free choice between those 3 that are displayed. You can't, of course, be democratic because we are authoritarian, which prevents that. In my build, I went for Imperial just because the free edict slot is very overpowered in the current version, because you can get like 50% output from your technicians or your miners for just a cheap price of 200 influence and a little bit more upkeep on those jobs. Yes, what you can see here are the different boosts you can give to your slaves. As you know, 40% of our total population will be enslaved, plus all the xenopops that we are going to conquer, be it the primitive pops that we are going to invade with advanced armies, or be it other empires that we are going to conquer in early to mid-game before we ascend to synthetic bodies. Now you can see Extend Shifts, for example, is an edict that gives you 10% slave output and 10% worker output, which also applies to the slaves because they are workers in some cases when they work in the mines. A tradition that gives you 5% output to workers and slaves, again, applies twice. You can have a ruler agenda that gives 10% slave pop resource output. You can have a governor that gives you 10% slave pop resource output, and you can utilize the building slave processing facility that increases the pop output from slaves and reduces their political power, so it doesn't matter as much when they are unhappy.
Now, something you should be aware of. We've made a slight change so that in the current build, indentured servants can't benefit from slave output bonus if they're working as specialists.
That is true. Those bonuses, the slave bonuses, only apply to slaves that work in the worker stratum. But you still have to remember, slave researchers don't get most of these bonuses, but they still cost almost no consumer goods to keep up, as opposed to normal researchers, which require at least half a consumer good if they are on decent conditions, more if you're on academic privilege, which is a viable thing to do as a fanatic materialist. Okay, as just spoken about, there's two viable ways of holding your slaves. On one side, we have your chattel slavery. In that case, your slaves are limited to working worker jobs, but they will get a 10% output bonus to their output, basically. They will be not happy about being chattel slaves, but who cares? In the case of indentured servitude, your pops will also be able to work specialist jobs. They will not receive the 10% bonus. They will be a little bit less happy, and they will have more political power, which means that their happiness matters more. But in the end, it's still viable to have those very, very low upkeep researchers.
Just to jump in quickly on that one, with the specialist stratum, they can't, however, be enforcers, and they can't be entertainers with indentured servants.
That is correct. There are different slave types that can fill those jobs.
Yeah, battle thralls and I can't remember what the other one is.
Domestic
but
servitude. Yes,
domestic
those can work
servitude.
the entertainer jobs. Sadly, it's really not viable to set slaves to those jobs. Just let that do your normal pops. Just let your normal pops take over these jobs, and let your slaves be on chattel slavery, or if you need the specialists, then put them on indentured servitude, so that you have those low upkeep researchers or other specialists.
And I don't think it was on the screenshot you had, because I think it's in 303, but your slave processing facilities also now let unemployed slaves automatically migrate to other worlds.
That is also a buff feature to consider when building that building. Yes. Okay. About the necrophage start. As I've said earlier, your two guaranteed worlds will be settled with primitive species. Now you can see in those two systems, Silush and Tius, there's two worlds, both inhabited already. By primitives. Primitive species don't have fleets, they don't have space stations that can fight you, they only have armies, and those armies are normally very, very weak. Most of them can be beaten by a single assault army. In some cases, like if the primitive world is advanced in the atomic age or in the early space age, you may need multiple assault armies, but they really don't have a chance against you. What this allows you to do is to colonize your starting worlds, not with colony ships that cost consumer goods, that cost alloys, that cost food. No, you can colonize those worlds with minerals, because that's what assault armies take to build. It's also way quicker. You just really need to have a starbase in the system. You invade the planet, and you have a fully colonized planet with a small debuff that goes away after 15 years, if I recall correctly, and you get 3 pops. Now, earlier, the amount of pops could vary from 4 pops to a maximum of 28 pops, corresponding to the age the primitive world has, ranging from Stone Age to early Space Age. I think that was changed as well in the beta branch to a maximum of 8 pops. I could be mistaken about that.
I've noticed 8 to 9 pops always.
Yeah.
And
Yep.
primitive worlds.
Yeah.
I think they fixed that, but don't quote me on this.
Okay, yeah. Even if it was nerfed to 8 to 9 pops per planet, that's still way of a hell more than the Prosperous Unification start gives you, which is only 4 pops. 16 pops is, of course, 12 more pops. So it's really good. Okay, then I was going to talk about some technology changes to especially the resource technologies. We've heard it earlier, if you build resource modules on your starbases, they will give you insane amounts of free, basically completely free resources. The base for hydroponic farms is, for example, 10. You get free 6 food from solar panels, and the same for nebula refineries, which give you free minerals. I think most of the people that play Stellaris know these technologies that are displayed here. They were only boosting your miners, your farmers, and your technicians, but now they also boost the resources you get from those Starbase modules. That's why it's a very good idea to focus these technologies just to get even more of that those free resources. Okay. Another question that most people have to answer earlier or later in the game is when should I stop doing technology or should do less technology, and when should I start to militarize my empire? When should I start to go after other players or after AI? Now, if you're playing in a competitive multiplayer game, and most competitive multiplayer games have a truce, then you should militarize before the truce ends, because if you don't, then that will be a very short game for you. But if you're playing in a casual multiplayer game or you're playing single player, then the best advice I can give you is to militarize after you have researched one of those displayed technologies and you want to militarize. So the technologies you can see here are the text for the different ship hulls, battleships, cruisers, and destroyers. The reason why you should militarize after researching one of those is because if you were to build some destroyers and then you researched new technologies, had better battleships will completely destroy those destroyers, and you can't refit your destroyers to be better. What you can do if you research better technologies for your battleships that you've already built is just refit those battleships to be in the new layout with your better technology. Yes. Okay, I hope that was understandable. But basically, those are the technologies you should militarize after.
It should also be pointed out that going with corvettes in early game, particularly against the AI, is completely viable, right?
It is. But this considers that you think that you're a tech rusher. So you're completely focusing on tech in the early game, and at some point you will want to stop focusing tech and go after the AI instead. If you want to militarize at the very start of the game and not tech rush, that is a viable thing to do. Just build corvettes until you can beat an AI, and then you have 2 home worlds, you have double the pops that you started with. That is indeed a viable strategy that Regunes will tell you more about later. Okay, it was already announced early on that we were going to talk about clerks, and I just want to let this picture in particular sink in. We have 2 different types of jobs displayed here. We have 8 pops working clerk jobs, and we have 8 pops working technician jobs. So if you do the math, then you realize that every technician here gives more than 16 energy, almost 17 in fact, while every clerk, of course, only gives 2 trade value, which translates to 2 energy and 2 amenities. Now, this is at the very game start, and you can already see that a technician is more than 8 times as efficient than a clerk. So it's a no-brainer to realize that you should never go for clerks if you have any other choice.
Now we buffed clerks, but we might not have buffed them enough looking at that image.
Yes, now the fact is that the clerks were buffed in the upcoming patch. Sadly, even if the trade value and amenities were improved by a certain amount, the technicians are still very, very much better. You saw the energy output from your base. Your starting technicians could be as high as 17 energy. You still have to consider there are buffs that apply to those technicians. You can, for example, on the top right, set the world to be a generator world, which will give you a plain 25% more output from your technicians. You can see those 2 technologies on the top left, the Mystic data modeling and the Gargantuan evolution. Those are event technologies, but they will both increase your technician output by 5%. There's other empire modifiers that are not technologies, that will increase your technician output, like the first contact event chain from crystalline entities, 10% from killing the spectral wraith, which is very easy to do with penetrating weapons like fighters or argometers. Of course, you also have to consider there's a technology that is repeatable that gives you 5% more technician output. There's almost no buff though for clerks. There's very rare buffs like a 10% plain trade value from the Caravaneers, and there's some event-related buffs, but that's about it. So technicians are better than clerks. Then I was going to talk about industry districts. As many of you have noticed by now, the primary way to get your alloys and your consumer goods are industry districts, not buildings anymore. And there's, in general, 3 different types of industry district. On the top left, you have the base industrial district. It gives 1 artisan and 1 metallurgist. That's what you get on normal worlds as well as habitats. On the bottom left, you have the industrial segment, which is on a ring world. On the base, it gives you 5 artisans and 5 metallurgists. This one also displays the bonus from an industry building that we are going to look at later. The archaeology districts are split up into the foundry archaeology, which gives you 6 metallurgists, and the factory archaeology, which gives you 6 artisans. Exactly. And we are going to also take a look at the industry buildings, which boost these districts. Oh yes, I have to click here. But first we're going to look at the planet specialization that will boost these districts. That is either Forge World or Industrial World. They only increased upkeep, sadly, of these jobs, which is still a huge thing if you have, for example, an Ecumenopolis with 130 metallurgists. The industry buildings add on every level 2 jobs of their respective job. And
jumping in the version that's out by the time this is going to be viewed, this is completely outdated.
Unfortunately.
So on the version that everyone is playing when this is out, this has changed to add extra output per artisan and metallurgist rather than more jobs.
Yeah, so instead of it giving +1 or +2 jobs, depending on the level of the building, it'll give +1 consumer good or +2 consumer good or +1 alloy or +2 alloys to every of the relevance job on that planet. So the base production goes up, but the corresponding base upkeep also goes up. So you're not getting something for nothing. But all of the base output is also multiplied by every job output bonus you can think of that would apply to the relevant job.
That is indeed a formidable buff to these jobs, but the base idea that if you get from this slide is that the buildings will boost the respective jobs that already exist on the planet, which makes it even more viable to specialize the worlds for one of the 2 goods, consumer goods or alloy factories. The same can be said about base resources. For example, here, minerals. Minerals also have a building that will add minerals from miners. They also add miner jobs, and they also added in the past, I assume, miner jobs per mining district. This was also changed, if I can recall correctly, to minerals from miners.
All of the jobs that used to add jobs per district are now just plus the output of those jobs to cut the number of jobs in the game, because we found that it was difficult to meet employment with the populate system. We decided to cut the number of pops on planets. Or cut the number of jobs.
Cut the number of jobs, increase the job output, makes sense, is still a great buff, and accomplishes the same thing as the old system. Exactly. So you should always specialize your worlds, be it for base resources like minerals or for alloys. It's all the same. Specialize your planets. Then I want to talk about trading with AI. Now, earlier we looked at a very nice feature called the market. I really don't like the market. They want a 30% tax for everything you buy or sell. They give you bad prices if you sell too much or the other people buy too much. It's just not a cool thing. AI will always be consistent in what they give you. And the best kind of trades are trades with those types of AI that really have too little of something. For example, this Lithoid AI has doesn't have enough food. Of course, they don't require food, but the AI still thinks that they need it. The same can be said about machine intelligences or hives for consumer goods.
Making a
Or...
note of us.
Yeah, yes.
I've got a meeting with our AI leads next week.
That is a good idea. Yeah, that is a very good idea. Also applies to machines wanting to buy food or stuff like that. So I'm selling monthly 21 food to this AI. On the market, I would get what? Maybe 15 energy credits, basically nothing. This AI will give me, however, 26 monthly energy credits and 14 alloys for 30 years. I think that's a very good trade deal, and I would love to do more business with this particular AI.
There is an unfortunate side effect that computers can't actually think. So teaching the AI to understand the value of things is a very complex process, and we tend to err on the side of being more forgiving towards whatever the player wants to do. Otherwise, the AI is likely to get itself into trouble. So this is a par for the course when it comes to computers making decisions about the value of things.
That's very accurate.
And the other things, you've mentioned lithoids here.
Yes.
How come you didn't make your necrophages into lithoids?
That is indeed a viable thing to do. You basically don't want to grow your necrophage pop anyways because of the minus 75% growth speed modifier. You can make them into lithoids as well, just so you can settle every single planet in the galaxy because of the very nice habitability buff. It's a viable thing to do.
It's the optimal thing to do.
It is the optimal thing to do. But in the end, you're going to synth and settle everything anyway, and your necrophage pops will only really work leader jobs once you're stretched thin enough, and some of those are affected by habitability, but most of them are not. You can definitely go for lithoid necroid. That is a thing. Now, yeah, another sentence about resolutions in the galactic community. There's 3 different branches of resolutions that I would personally vote for every single time, and that is industry, science, and military. So the industrial development will gradually increase the output of workers. It will give you more minerals from jobs. It will give you more alloys from jobs. It will also increase the habitability up to minus 20% on the last resolution, but that doesn't really matter. By that point, you should be synth-ascended, or at least have Gaia worlds, machine worlds, hive worlds, whatever you need to have 100% habitability everywhere. It's basically free resources. The Unchained Knowledge Chain gives you more output from research stations and later on also researchers. But the main thing you want to get from this chain is the diplomatic weight from tech. Now, especially in single player, it is very important to get these types of resolutions because AI will keep up with you in terms of economy up until early endgame in a normal scenario, but you will always outpace AI in technology, no matter what. And having that diplomatic weight from technology will allow you to get other resolutions through, like forming the Galactic Council, becoming the Emperor, for example, and all the other stuff you would ever want. The same thing applies to mutual defense. Now that you are so far ahead in technology and are still even on industry, your fleet will, in a normal scenario, be 10 times as large as the fleet of any AI in the galaxy. And you just want that diplomatic weight, so you can bully the other empires in the galactic community or in your federation if you have passed a law that gives you voting power based on your diplomatic weight.
Going down that path that you've just described, I was, in one of our internal MPs, able to have the highest diplomatic weight in the galaxy and become custodian while being an inward perfectionist, which gives you minus 50% to diplo weight.
That is
Impressive.
definitely a thing you can do. Okay, then a little fun fact. Many of you know about the Starbase module that will give you starting experience on your ships. That will give you 100 XP. There's actually different experience levels for ships, starting at 0 with no buffs, and then level 1 will give you that 10% ship's weapons damage that you can see here. Ships gain a single experience per day in combat. So it's a reasonable thing to assume that nobody has ever seen a ship that got past level 2 or even reached level 3, because that would require your ships to have been in combat for at least 1,000 or even 10,000 days. And if you're in combat that long, it's a good chance that that ship was destroyed and you had to build another one to replace it. Now, to show you the buffs on the other ship ranks, a veteran will double that buff from before. It will give you 20% ship weapons damage. It will also give you 5% hull points as well as 5% evasion. And you need to be at 1,000 experience for this level, and at 10,000 experience, so 10,000 days in combat, you will get 40% weapon damage, 10% evasion, and 10% hull points. Now you're not ever gonna reach that in a normal scenario, but what you can do is use very, very weak enemy fleets that have weapons so that they will engage you in combat. That can, for example, be sublight probes, or certain event fleets that are very, very weak. And then you will strip all your ships and send them into combat against this enemy. Then you spend 30 years in combat and get a free buff of 30% weapons damage and hull points and evasion just by letting yourself be shot at by a single abandoned sublight probe. It's especially easy to do in multiplayer. If you have a friend, he sends over one corvette with one single red laser and just engages your fleets in combat. And in the end, you're almost twice as strong as before. Now, it's not advisable to do that if you don't trust your friend or have other rivals that are nearby, because while you're doing that, of course, your ships have no weapons, which they can use to invade you and to wipe out your fleet. So only do this when you're safe, but if you have the chance, I would definitely recommend it. It's a free buff that almost nobody uses. The same can be said about admirals. Having a high-level admiral will give you more fire rate. It will give you different buffs from their traits. And as a normal empire, you should always train your admirals with the feature of piracy suppression. So what you can do is assign a single admiral to a single corvette, repeat that 20 times, and then send those 20 corvettes to patrol between one system, your home system, for example, and your first colony, and basically do that forever. So every month that your admirals do this, they will earn 5 experience. Over the years, this will add up, and after 20 years, you will have level 4 admirals. Now, your leaders as Necrophage or Necrophage Lithoid are basically immortal already. They get so many lifespan bonuses, they will never die in a normal scenario. Once you Synth ascend, they become immortal, so you can train them for 100 years and get them to level 10. It is indeed worth it. Now this assumes, of course, that you don't have any traditions or anything like that increases the experience gain for leaders. There's a tradition, there's an edict, there's a ruler trait, there's technologies, and there's of course the leader traits for the admirals themselves that will boost their experience income. And that will, of course, shorten the time span that you need to suppress piracy to get your admirals to level 4, which is ideal, or level 10 if you have the time.
So, late game top tip to add to that. Rather than building your gateway network directly into your capital, build it with a single jump gap between your capital and the gateway that all of your trade gates attach to. In that gap, build your mega shipyard and shipyards and keep your fleets there. Congratulations, your admirals now passively level up.
Now, that is a fair thing to say that when you build gateways just so your trade reaches your capital easier, you don't really need to level up your admirals anymore because you should be the strongest empire in the galaxy. But that is definitely a thing you should consider because if you don't have to protect your trade anymore, you won't get any more experience from protecting your trade.
Yep. So having that one gap, and particularly then putting your starbase, like your main shipyard, in that gap, it means that your fleets will have to make a single jump to get to a gateway, but just put it immediately on the entrance to the hyperlane that connects to the starbase system. And hey presto. You look disgusted, Byron.
I am. With
It's
both
filthy. You know, gone undetected. No, that was really cool. That was some informative stuff there. My main takeaway from all of that is that it was the ship experience. If your ships are never reaching in normal gameplay, even highly
I've never
optimized
seen
play,
it.
in highly optimized play, never reaching those high levels, that's something where we should take note and see if maybe we should reduce the amount of XP they have to go through.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
probably a value that was set a long time ago that, because it's such a tucked away part of the game, has never really gotten much attention since. But for all its optimization, it kind of was a good demonstration of like a thematic but optimal playstyle. Like, you know, these aren't exactly an empire of the nicest people in the world, and they play as such. So that was really cool. This was a good expansion on a lot of the core concepts that Stefan covered, and getting into the nitty gritty of the more granular decisions you have to make, which is really neat.
It's
Yeah,
true.
something I adore about that empire is exactly what you just touched on, Jojo. For those that are watching who don't fall into the min-max player, for those of you who are more the roleplay player, this is an empire that lets you roleplay completely and totally and still experience sort of the level of tech that min-max has put out, and getting into that position where you can just bully the galaxy to do what you want to do whilst remaining entirely in the role play of your race and within the character of your race, which I also think is really neat.
That's true. The necrophage parasites that force poor primitives to do their research and also enslave them. I can see the roleplay aspect in that, as well as the min-max aspect.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus, you could write a sci-fi book about that in about 30 seconds, couldn't you? Yeah, definitely a theme. And
I wouldn't
Byron,
be surprised if there is a sci-fi book about that exact
yeah,
scenario. out there.
quite. And Byron, there were a few bits in that where both of us jumped in and were like, that's changing, which is interesting, and part and parcel. Like, this is where I'll bring all of you in to discuss this a little bit. It's part and parcel of the difficulty of figuring out the meta of Stellaris, because every time there's a meta, then a new version of the game comes out, and then invariably there's a new meta. And yeah, like, how do you feel like this first bit is aimed at Jojo and Byron. How do you guys feel when you see, you know, the stupid numbers that people manage to put out and that sort of thing?
Fine. It's no matter what we do, there will be an optimal way to play. There are numbers and they're static. Once you implement them into the game, we cannot change them on the fly dynamically to make your game easier and harder. And we don't want to dictate how people play. But as long as it's not stale, as long as there's enough flexibility, and as long as it's easy enough for us to shake up the meta every now and then when we decide to change things, it's fine. It's just a different way to play the game. For some people, a lot of the appeal of video games is the system mastery aspect, and that is what this is.
I used to be one of those players
Yeah.
back before I was hired. Not with Stellaris, but with EU4, I used to be one of those players. I see pros and I see cons. I don't like the idea of being able to break the game in two so easily. I'd like there to be some challenge towards system mastery, but I don't want the game to be balanced. Don't get me wrong, we want it to be balanced within a degree, but I want there to be opportunities for players to take Origins and Civics that are slightly weaker to give themselves more of a challenge. Because Stellaris doesn't have a static map where you have some nations weaker than others. There should be some way of players opting into a challenge, in my opinion.
Or opting out, as such.
Or opting out,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah. So we are going to need to push on at this point, and we're going to move on to our last one. Regune, we unfortunately are running a little bit short on time, so no dilly-dallying in this one. Everyone, no interjections in this one, if we can avoid it, please. So Regune is going to talk about the aggressive expansionist. Go, please, Regune.
Okay, so 1 second. I don't think can I move? Oh yeah, I can move. Okay, good. So I'm going to talk about the aggressive expansionist, which is a very popular playstyle in Stellaris now, because aggression has always been a thing in this game. There are roughly 3 empires that follow this rule of being very aggressive. So we're going to start by the machine. So machine empire they're pretty straightforward. It doesn't matter if you're a simulator, an exterminator, or a salvator. What matters is that you make a lot of energy, and you will also want to have the emotion emulator trait to have less maintenance drones, much like HIVE. The new origin used by machine now is consolidated resources, because it allows to have a lot of specialist drones. And yeah, another build that is very similar, but this time the Devouring Swarm Civic is much more appealing. It is often banned in MPs, and it's something that I love playing against the AI. So what they do, they're on the origin called Doomsday, and that allows them to output absolute numbers when it comes down to energy or minerals, or even alloys. And you will see later that it allows to do some very interesting stuff. And finally, we have roughly the one that just it's much similar to what UMAR said, except necrophages are often banned in multiplayers. So instead, we have roughly the same thing, except with the origin like on the shoulder of giants, or prosperous unification, sometimes even with life seeded, the Gaia start, because it allows better output. The main goal of all those breeds is to have a superior early game economy, which allows superior fleets and which allows earlier conquest. So, why aggressivity, you ask? Well, Stellaris is a game of momentum, as I said. Every planet, every tribute will serve you exponentially. More systems mean more resources and a greater buffer for your core worlds. More resources means more ships, more science, and earlier endgame perks such as the megastructures or even a Crisis Ascension perk. When it comes down to decision making, when you're an aggressive player, you have to ask yourself, who will be your first target? When do you plan to attack? With corvettes or with destroyers, for instance. Is supremacy worthwhile for your attack? What war do you intend to use? Is it a tributary war to have more resources? Or is it a conquest war to just take out the planets of your target? Oftentimes when you're Gestalt, such as HIVE or Machine, you want a tributary war because keeping the conquered planets in line as Gestalt is much more difficult, for they do not have any rulers that can buff the happiness. But oftentimes you want to do both. Even when you're Gestalt, you want to conquer the core worlds of the head of the beast, just so it will never become a threat to you anymore. You also need to take into consideration what your enemy can do to stop you, like a system that nullifies shields or technologies that gives them an advantage, or even allies that could come from another way. And the decision making vary a lot depending on if you're playing versus AI, which is sometimes predictable, and versus players, which are also very predictable, but they are also very aggressive. And there is also factoring the fact that Total War Empires requires a different approach at warfare, which involves much more ground forces, especially versus AI. As versus a player, you will not often face Total War Empires because it's often agreed that they're banned as well. Yeah. So when it comes down to aggressivity, because it's an early game thing, espionage and intel do not fully come into play at this stage of the game. Still, there are things like gather information, steal technology, or even sabotage starbase that can be worthwhile. But the operations cost energy, and oftentimes energy wants to be spent into ships at this stage of the game. So it's very interesting, and it can be useful, but you want to avoid it. What you don't want to avoid, though, is having intel of your enemy, because now that the fog of war is a thing, it is much more difficult to have a better graph of how the war will happen. And if you do not have all the information during the war, you might as well rush to your doom. So the contact system, you can decide whether you want your enemy to know if you're going to attack or not by not researching them in versus the players, and you can take them by surprise. That is, of course, if there are not rules such as peace timers, which is very common in imps. And against the AI, it doesn't matter. You just want to kill them as fast as possible. So obviously, to kill someone, you need to have ships, and ship building is actually is complex in many aspects. But there are key things that mean that make it easier to understand. For example, some things that I say a lot to new player is bigger usually means better when it comes down to hull or where it comes down to weapons. When you have bigger stuff, it has a better impact on the disengagement chance. Disengagement chance is also often very overlooked by new players, whereas it is very important in warfare in Stellaris. The picket computer, which you can have on cruisers, especially on cruisers and on destroyers, is also very important to have a better accuracy and better tracking against corvettes and smaller vessels. You also need to ask yourself, how much do you want to invest in warfare? Oftentimes, when it's multiplayer, you want to invest as much as possible. And can you equip it? As in, can you upkeep your fleet? And sometimes it's okay to go above your naval capacity as long as you're able to upkeep it. Last time I saw a player that had well above twice his naval capacity, 200 destroyers with red lasers, and still he was able to keep it. And you also need to factor what advantage you might have that your enemy doesn't. For instance, did you have a governor that made your ship cheaper and thus have more ships? Did you have a ruler that made your destroyers cheaper and thus have more destroyers? Do you have the glorious weapon that is known as proton launchers, which is the absolute trump card of any fleet? and that can happen very early in games, as early as 30 to 35 years, which is why oftentimes proton launchers and neutron launchers are banned until 50 years in the game, because they are that good. Back to disengagement chance. So disengagement chances depend. It's a modifier that essentially it's a very important aspect of warfare in Stellaris, obviously. But when ships fall below 50 HP, it is likely to disengage and live to fight another day. A ship that disengages is essentially a fleet that you didn't lost and that you don't have to rebuild. Ships such as corvettes, destroyers, cruisers, and battleships have different disengagement modifiers. For instance, corvettes have 1, and they have low hull, which means that they easily die, and you have oftentimes you have to replace them. Destroyers and cruisers have 1.5 and have higher hulls, which means they disengage quite easily. And battleships also have a 1.25 disengagement chance, but usually it's about the time when there is a lot of proton launchers or neutron launchers, and those two weapons nullify disengagement chance. So disengagement chance is very important up to the point where there is those two weapons are there, and even then it's still pretty worthwhile. What can also affect disengagement chance is, do you fight in your own systems? It's something that I will cover a bit more later, the defensive part of Stellaris. And if your ships have a lot of hull, such as through the crystal plating, which is tech that you can get through various events, but it's essentially a very important and cost-efficient alternative to armor.
So, Regune, I'm going to have to jump in here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you're not going to be able to go through that later because we have 2 minutes left. Yeah, I know. We've already gone through most of the time. So, and I'm horrifically sorry to do this. What I will organise is I'm going to organise Regunes to come on to one of our weekly streams, the Interstellar Assembly, and do this presentation to completion during that, because unfortunately we have just run out of time. And yeah, I'm terribly sorry about this. We've unfortunately just run short here. And so what we're going to have to do is organise that. We'll organise that as soon as humanly possible and put the information out on the Discord, so that you can at least see the rest of what it is that we were going to talk about. And if the rest of you are free, then you're of course welcome to join for that as well. I'm really sorry, Regunes. I genuinely am.
No problem.
We unfortunately, and I know as well, Byron and Jojo had stuff they wanted to talk about, and unfortunately we have, yeah, just completely and totally run out of time here. So, with all that being said, I do want to say thank you to all 5 of you for joining us here. This has been fascinating. It genuinely has. And I would also like to thank everyone who's been watching. I hope this has been as enjoyable for you guys as it has been for us. Again, we're really sorry that we have run out of time, but there is a schedule to keep, and we will keep to the schedule. So, with that being said, everybody say goodbye.
Bye.
Bye.
And we will see you all soon. Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.